Welcome to FedScoop TV. I'm Wyatt Cash, and we're here at the Red Hat Government Symposium. Joining me today is Adam Clater, Chief Architect for Red Hat's North American Public Sector. Welcome to the program.
Always glad to be here.
So we're talking about things around open source today in particular, but what I'd like to ask you first is, what are the primary benefits that you think open source technology continues to provide the federal government?
Absolutely, Wyatt. So, in the beginning, right, as we say, open source technology really took a commoditization play into the data center. So no longer were you buying your hardware, your operating system, your compiler from a single company. When Red Hat came along with great OEM partners, we were able to give choice to CIOs in their data center. So they could make a decision on best of breed or best cost analysis hardware acquisition by using the Linux operating system to kind of remain the same while everything else around it could change. Today, I think that what we're driving for the government is much more innovation. So if we look at the commercial marketplace today, all of the innovation that's happening in the world is really happening in open source communities. And we've got these giants of industry that are contributing and harnessing that technology really on the bleeding edge of technology. So Red Hat's real mission in life is to participate in those communities and make that technology and that innovation consumable in a way that sort of meets the life cycle and lifestyle of an enterprise consumer like the government.
Makes sense. As agencies continue to look at emerging technologies and also trying to innovate, help me get a better sense for how open source fits into that and actually helps them as the landscape continues to evolve.
Absolutely. So there's a lot of talk around sort of IT modernization today. And I think one of the great things that people are beginning to realize about technology is there is no end state of technology.
Right.
There's, Matt Lera said this morning, the relay race of modernization that we find ourselves in. And so by using open source technologies and tapping into innovation in those communities, agencies are able to build sort of their next generation platforms today. But as they look down the road at the picture that they have, they know that by building on open source technologies, using open standards, with long-term vendor support from companies like Red Hat, they're going to be able to make changes in the future in order to adapt in that relay race. They sort of pass that baton on to the next generation of technologists.
So another thing we've been hearing a lot today is around the advances in the use of container technology. Tell me a little bit more about how that can also drive innovation for agencies.
Yeah. So containers have been great because they really give developers the ability to very, very quickly build an environment and spin that environment up that meets their requirements for sort of the innovative technology that they want to tap into to solve their mission problem very, very quickly. So the speed at which a container can be deployed as opposed to building a virtual machine and sort of the governance that can be carried along with that container is incredibly valuable. As we move forward and as we begin to build more and more complex applications on these container stacks, the ability to really orchestrate those containers becomes, in my opinion, much more interesting and much more attractive as a focal point than the actual underlying container. Think of the container as the primitive or the piece part that's going to go together to make this larger thing. But how we orchestrate that, it's the stoplight of sort of how you move people in and out of a city. Cars are how you move people in and out of city, buses, but it's really the stoplight that's controlling them and saying, oh, you've got to turn left here, you've got to do this. So think of that sort of orchestration layer as providing a huge amount of value. And once you're able to orchestrate those containers between multiple clouds, that's when we can really have conversations about avoiding lock-in in any particular provider.
That makes a lot of sense too. Lastly, cybersecurity continues to be the preeminent IT concern among federal agencies. Can you briefly describe how industry can help agencies use open source more effectively to promote security?
Absolutely. So open source is at its core a cultural phenomenon. And it is really this idea that I'm going to make a contribution to a cause and to a code base. And I'm going to reap the benefits not only of my contribution, but of the contributions that everyone else has made. And when you have a large community of folks working together, that makes a lot of sense. If we look at the Linux kernel has 22 million lines of code, give or take. There's 13,000 plus individuals who have made contributions to that. 1,300 companies are actively making contributions to that. So in the aggregate, that's a huge, huge software project that has shown billions of dollars of value throughout the world. if we take that same premise and we apply that to our security controls and our documentation, we have things like the SCAP Security Guide, which is an open source community that Red Hat hosts, where folks are able to say, hey, I've got this NIST 853 control, the same one that all of you have, and here's how I solved that problem, how I automated it, documented it, etc. So we've had that for several years. We actually ship that functionality with Red Hat Enterprise Linux today. The folks over at 18F have created another community, which is called the Open Control Group. And so what that is saying is, now that I know what controls I have to conform to and how I'm going to conform to them, there's still this stack of documentation that needs to be sort of written and signed off on. How do I sort of compile that documentation in a way that my CISO is going to accept that, so I can have this idea of a continuous ATO? Because since there's no endpoint, I've got to continually refresh my ATO of what's in that environment, and automating as much of that as possible, working together collaboratively across communities, I think is showing tremendous value to the government.
I appreciate that. Well, Adam, thank you so much for stopping by and filling us in a little bit on some of your perspectives on open source, and appreciate that.
Absolutely. Thanks.
Great. Look for more of our coverage at fedscoop.com on all things open source and IT modernization in government. I'm Wyatt Cash. Thanks for watching.